how do you juxtapose then and now? If people are actually living, I mean, the police repression, I'm not that the police weren't shooting black people back then. Of course they were. We just weren't filming it. But the despair, the physical, social, and political conditions of the underclass is, I think, arguably worse. Why don't we have that consciousness?
Because what you have is the bubbling underneath. It is there and it is going to explode. But it's not going to be an explosion where people are going to be working to become a part of this society that was in the 60s and the 70s. It was a struggle for the poor and oppressed to become a part of.
Right.
That dream is dead.
Yes, that's
right.
There
is just ugliness now. There is just angerness, and it was created by the government that exists now. They think that they can continue this forever.
Right.
And what you have is, like in housing, you have an influence of money, right-wing corrupt money coming to the United States, coming to New York, and they're creating...
They're driving everyone out.
Not only that, they're creating a wealthy society compared to a society that has nothing. And what you're going to see, and I guarantee it, more of, there's going to be death. People are going to rob.
I don't agree with that. I don't agree that there is, right below the surface, a lot of unrest. I don't see it either. I don't see it at all. I don't see it, even Black Lives Matter, which most of the left sees as the saving grace. Oh, we now have a movement again. That's not a movement. That's really just comparable to the old-time CORE and SNCC, not SNCC so much, but CORE and NAACP and, all of those organizations that were in existence in the 60s, but which we really considered
which
to
tend
be
to be
wimps.
issue.
Right. And
Single issue organization.
And we're not really ready to do anything militant.
I see it different. Go ahead.
Wait, I don't see, Ralph says, that he sees that there's a viciousness out there, and I think there is, but I don't see it bubbling to the surface in the way he sees it.
Well, we have such
a force.
We have such fierce systems of repression, including mass incarceration. You were, how long, 3 years in prison? After you 4 years disbarred in Texas.
Right. Awful, but yes, that the prison systems are more efficient. Everything is much more efficient. But the question is that sense of young people in particular, are they so fed up that they say, as we said in the 60s, if we can't have the apples off the tree, we'll chop the damn tree down. They don't have that.
And let me just add that you were thrown in prison really when it boils down to, because you were the defense attorney for Omar Abdul Rahman, the blind sheikh, who was, after the terrorism hysteria, blamed for the bombing of the
well, partially, it was always associated with World Trade Center 1, which he wasn't.
Right, 93
but he was the face of terrorism.
Right.
He was... Every newspaper, Daily News, New York Post, there was this guy with the red turban and the shades.
Right.
Which the first thing I said to him as his lawyer was, get rid of the shades.
Right.
Even though my eyes are very ugly, the guy who had been the informant told him that. I said, yes, they are, but they're real. You're not hiding behind anything. But that's irrelevant. I just say that some of my clients who were from the hoods of this neighborhood, the very people we're talking about, after I was arrested and indicted and then ultimately convicted, they came to my office to see me and they'd say, Miss Stewart, or Lynn, whichever way we were addressing each other, they'd say, they didn't do this to you because of that old Muslim with the turban. They did this because of Larry Davis, who was a young man who acted in his own self-defense against armed police. He said, they did it because you defended us, street guys, all these years. And you're a problem to them. But that's what, it's not really about the old sheikh, which of course is, I do agree, it is partly that. But they had the sheikh and they could use that as an excuse, and they did.
And you were released on compassionate release. You had a 10-year sentence,
I
Probably
had,
because you have
yes,
cancer.
I went back and they gave me a 10-year. I got a
Right,
low.
yes, I know. The
yeah,
whole
it's
thing was
just the
ridiculous.
whole thing is
We don't have time to get into
from
it.
the charade from beginning to
Right.
end.
I mean,
But,
originally it was a minor reprimand, and then Cheney decided to turn you into an accomplice of terrorism. Before we finish, I want to ask you about the corrosion of the legal system. The legal system's always been stacked against the oppressed and the poor, always. And yet, when you began in the early 70s, there was more space. You even call it the golden age of the legal system. Just briefly tell me what you had and what we've lost.
okay, I saw it as, I would characterize it as a pot boiling. And when the pot gets to the point where it's starting to boil over, then the government knows it has to do something. It can't just let it continue, because if it boils over, it can ruin it, quote, for everyone, and meaning mainly those with money. So as a result, I think, and this was my analysis of it, that they make it a little easier. And one of the things they did
So
was,
you're talking about there was pressure in the 60s and early 70s because of radical movements.
yes,
So they created a kind of safety valve where they gave people more space and voice within the system, including the legal system.
right, and especially the legal system, because they had there the Supreme Court under Earl Warren, very famously. They just turned the whole system around. The rights that did not exist were created. There was no right to an attorney. There was, you were not protected on a lineup. You were not. Ironically, and I'm sort of grinning now, yes, they expanded all of these rights, and the right to be, it never was that if there was a bad search, the fruits of that search were suppressed and couldn't be used against you. That was a 60s thing. All of that came in, and the law seemed to be opening up and guarantee more rights to those accused of crime.
And when did that start to close again?
Well, I would say that started to close in the mid-70s again. And it closed with certain, I'm not going to cite you cases, that was never my strong suit, but I can tell you we all knew it, and we all knew it from the way the judges decided cases that were obviously bad searches in 1978 were no longer bad searches. And cops that were lying somehow had regained credibility, the same kind of put up story.
And then it's kind of
etc.
extinguished after 9/11.
Yes.
And in your case, you had met with your client with what had once been attorney-client privilege, and you were surreptitiously tape recorded by the government, and they played that tape in your trial. Is that correct?
Right. And actually, when it took place, when they were taping it, that was before 9/11.
Oh, was it?
That was when they came after me, but they didn't really. They wrote me a letter and said I couldn't do that anymore, and then they let me continue visiting him.
Right.
And I visited
and you were not
him.
disbarred.
No,
you were not.
2010, I continued. Ramsey Clark had done many press releases.
And then was it Dick Cheney?
No, it was our very favorite friend, John Ashcroft. But this is after 9/11. And
Then they revisit your case and decide to imprison
that's what
you
we
for it.
think. We can't prove that, but I think they went back into the file and they said, "Oh, look at this. This is a good one. We don't have much going on here. We're supposedly waging this war on terror, and they had the young man that they had captured in Afghanistan, the American." I can't remember his name.
Lynn.
No.
Lynn was his name,
Lynne.
right?
But at any rate, they had him, and they had this poor mutt of a guy who was a Puerto Rican New Yorker who was caught supposedly bringing a dirty bomb into the country, and they locked him up in solitary. But that's all they had. They had nobody else. But they had this old record. They had a convicted terrorist, Sheikh Omar. It was a no-brainer for them to bring this against.
So let me close by asking you each succinctly, with the histories that you have and both of your intimate relationships with the radical movements that opened up space, opened up our democracy. It's now closed. Why? Given the deterioration that's taken place economically, politically, socially, culturally, why isn't that another form of militancy being expressed in a way that it was in the 60s and the 70s.
What we have today, the parallel today, is the government solved problem and they solved the problem. Or the government solved the problem ahead of the people. And now we have people and the communities, there's a possibility.
They solved it through severe repression against radical movements, including political assassinations of people like Fred Hampton, and buying off the black elite. Were those the two mechanisms?
Exactly. And the big mechanism was the television with the desire, inculcating in people the desire to be a part of America. So what we see today is places like Center City, Chicago, 25 murders a day, because the government sees that there's a possibility with this oppression there's going to be a boiling over. And so what are they doing? They're destroying all black communities. And this is where the oppression is. But the one they missed was the white community. You see, white people, children...
Tell us what issue you are referring to.
The total oppression. You take food, you can do anything with people but take food away.
They'll never do that.
Well,
This is our argument that goes back and forth. He says when they are starving, people are going to come out. I said they'll never let that happen. They know they are so keyed.
But the only thing in defense of Ralph is that food insecurity is rising, and because the government has been surrendered to corporate power. Corporate power only knows one word, and that's more. There is no internal limits, and now there are no external. You're right about government, but government has become so anemic in the face of corporate power that I'm not sure that those rational restraints are there. That's what the liberal class is. The liberal class functions as a mechanism. This is what Roosevelt did. This is what Nixon did, our last liberal president. It functions as a mechanism to do exactly what both of you said, to essentially, let off, intervene enough to defang. Yes. I'm not certain that's going to happen again because we're in such a dysfunctional system.
Yes, and we see how dysfunctional is it. Can you imagine not having water? Flint. And we knew it was coming. As Reverend Pinckney said, it's coming to you next. And what was the issue? The issue was over water. Right. And all across the country, this oppression, this insecurity. Think of housing. How many people are sleeping in the street? Now, we have been flim-flammed or misled by people saying that change can't come through violence. All the change that you know comes through violence. And once people learn that, they learn if they don't have $1 and they take it from you, that's violence. Change does come. And it's going to hit and everybody's going to be surprised and say, what happened? This is what happened. The government oppresses, and they're trying to get ahead of it by destroying the communities. And I look at Chicago and I'm saying, this is the same thing that happened in the 60s with the drugs. They have all of the drugs, they have all the informants, and 25 people are being killed today by black people. They're fighting over these assets. And I says, and one day it's going to turn.
I just want to end by saying that, I do have high hopes, never ever giving up. Right. Because as someone once said to me in Berkeley, of all places, they said, Lynn, when we were in the 50s and we were out there trying to get people signing petitions for the Rosenbergs and they executed them, we really thought, this is never going to change. And then we had the 60s. Right. So I feel the same way. I look at it now and I say, can this ever change? Are we so caught up in this? Is there so much YouTube and so little people actually communicate? Will it change? And I have faith. It will change, and it will come about the way it always does, by people who just have fed up and go out there and say, I am going to fight for this, because we are also, as Ralph has just finished saying, we are sold a bill of goods that it's going to come by being nice and playing nice. It's never going to come that way.
All right, well, we're going to have you back after all of this has happened to find out who's right.
I like that.
No. Since that may be a few minutes coming.
And thank you for watching Days of Revolt.
Had to eat out the watermelon patch. And they put me in a shack